most people are not actually enjoying being a son of God. They want to be a servant of God, and you can't be a good servant if you haven't learned how to be a good son of God.
Welcome to the Carla Rand Show, a weekly podcast designed to dig into the lives of everyday people. People who are making a positive impact, people who have risen above and overcome obstacles, insights and stories from ordinary individuals who inspire us all towards the truly extraordinary. Here's your host.
All right, well, I'm here with Phil Webb, and Phil is, you're someone I look up to, Phil, a lot. And you've been into our church, you've worked with a lot of leaders, you've been a missionary, and our church has actually supported you and your wife and your missions work for many, many years. But I only knew you as just like this guy that just kind of showed up, and I was like a little kid, and I didn't really know much about what was going on. But then you came more recently, and you've been, maybe taking some of the services in the church sometimes, preaching, whatever. And it's just like, it's really neat to kind of get to know you more. And so I'm really honored to have you on here, Phil. I know that you have a lot to say about leadership and just a lot to say about a lot of topics. So thank you for being here, first of all. I'm just really honored to have you, Phil.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to give my 2 bits.
Awesome, yeah. And I know you will, and I know that we'll learn a lot. So let's start by just kind of giving everybody a bit of an idea who you are. So where did you grow up, Phil?
Well, yeah, when people ask me who I am, I'm a little confused, actually, because first of all, I was born in Peru, South America, because my parents were missionaries, born in the jungles of Peru, and they were from England. And so I spent many years in Peru growing up. Then I spent years in England. Then I came to Canada to finish high school and then into post-secondary education, then got married to a Canadian, then went and lived in Colombia for 30 years. So I really don't know who I am if you ask me where I'm from. But
Okay, got it.
But it actually is quite enriching to have 4 cultures in my blood.
Yeah, and what made you want to be a missionary? Like, how did that all play out?
Good question. I think all our past, God seeks to redeem your past and also the tough things of your past, difficult things of your past. So I grew up, of course, as a missionary child, but I was sent to a boarding school at 6 years old. And so there was a lot of difficulty growing up where you don't see your parents 8 months of the year, all those type of scenarios. So the difficulties I had growing up as a missionary child, when I finally finished university, I became a phys ed teacher, but I also had a degree in religious education. And I wanted to go back to help missionary children because I knew I could understand them. And I wanted to actually help missionary children not have to have the same questions, same struggles. So when the opportunity came, my wife and I are both teachers. We went to teach in a missionary school in Colombia, Medellin, Colombia.
So that's how you got there, was basically, it's interesting you're a phys ed teacher because, yeah, like I'm all into fitness and nutrition and my husband's a phys ed teacher. So that's kind of cool.
Yes, and sports has played a huge part in my life. It was my identity basically for many, many years. I think due to the lack of love in my own home, because I didn't see my parents, I think I sought affirmation through being good at sports. And it has played a huge role, not just in my identity, because I know my identity can't, in the end, it can't be based on what I can do. But as I was growing up, it did play a huge role. And I mean, coaches began to play roles in my life that maybe my parents hadn't played. So I think I was learning through the whole system, teamwork. All these issues are fabulous for when you get into ministry as well.
Hmm. And what was it like being, I mean, it's like all you ever really knew, but like, what is it like to be in all these different cultures? I mean, what was it like to be in Colombia for 30 years and then coming back to Canada and, and having been, born out in Peru and like what's that all been like for you? Is it a lot of culture shock or do you feel like you just don't really, you don't like, do you kind of identify with a certain culture more than others or what's that like? Cause I haven't really been out of Canada like a couple of times for like a quick trip, you know?
Most missionary children are called third culture children. That means they really aren't any from any culture
Mm,
because they're so confused. There's so many cultures playing into your life that you feel like you don't fit anywhere.
mm,
Most missionary children feel that. Um, but of course, that's part of growing up and trying to figure out what my identity really is. And I think it was good for me to have to struggle through these identities because it forced me to look at what is identity really based on? Is it based on a culture? Is it based on a family structure? Is it based, no, in the end, is it based on what I do, what other people think of me, all those things? So I struggled, but it helped me come to a realization that I had to figure out what it meant to have my identity based on my faith in Christ. And in the end, that is the only stable thing that would give me actually the stability to actually do my work.
yeah. I can see that. And that, I suppose, in a way, it could be a gift to you because somebody like me who's like born and raised in the same place. And then, then I went away for, a couple hour drive, basically, then came back to the same place. Like I have a lot tied up in just like where I'm from, my family, all the connections that I have. So I suppose for you, maybe in other ways, it's not a gift. I have a gift in other ways, but like, not having that stable has probably forced you to look outside of that, right? And to look to God for that.
For sure. And you begin to actually appreciate every culture has different values. And you begin to be able to recognize a wider range of values that maybe in a one culture society, if you only grew up with one, you actually don't realize that the rest of the world actually doesn't think exactly like we do.
Mm,
They actually think differently. They have values that we don't think are important, etc. So I think it widens your scope, gives you ability to actually recognize, what, there's far more out there than we might think. So
hmm
every culture gives you something special.
hmm Yeah, and I really wanted to have you on. I mean, we could talk a lot about this, but I really wanted to have you talk about leadership, Phil, because leadership is like that's something that you work with a lot of leaders, particularly pastors, right? So you are a leader yourself. You're helping other leaders. So I really feel like you would have a lot to say about leadership. And I know it's a big, broad topic, so you can kind of take it and go, whatever, wherever you want. But first of all, let's just start with like, why is leadership important?
Um, I had to take a course at a seminary about 15 years ago, actually more. Now it's 20 years ago. And while I was taking that seminary course, they forced you to write your own uh, vision of your own leadership. What you had to write one sentence that would describe what you want to do with leadership. And this is my phrase that, and I believe it's basically guided my thinking on what I do the last 25 years almost. And what it says is this: I seek to train healthy, reproducing leaders who joyfully serve from the resources they freely receive from their Heavenly Father. Now, it has a lot of points to it. I'll just read it again. Train healthy, reproducing leaders who joyfully serve from the resources they freely receive from their Heavenly Father. Now, there's a reason why all those parts are in there.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, most leaders don't reproduce themselves. So they're not really good leaders. I think a good leader should reproduce himself, be able to reproduce in many ways. Second of all, that they do it joyfully. There's a lot of leaders out there that aren't really enjoying what they're doing. And how can we joyfully serve? It demands something. You can't joyfully serve if your identity, if you're not secure, if you aren't resting in who you are. So, and then it says, from the resources they freely receive from their Heavenly Father. Well, honestly, our greatest problem in life isn't serving and doing things. Honestly, I've found that most people find it harder to receive and receive freely. That's where grace comes in. And most people don't receive freely from God. And I say they have to freely receive from their Heavenly Father, because I think most people are not actually enjoying being a son of God. They want to be a servant of God. And you can't be a good servant if you haven't learned how to be a good son of God. And so that's why all those pieces are in there, because your identity determines what type of leader you will be as well.
Okay, so you said until they learn how to be a good son of God or daughter of God, whatever.
Yeah, that's right. So
what does that look like, Phil?
See, I burnt out. I burnt out in leadership. After a few years of actually being in leadership, actually planting churches in Colombia. And it wasn't God asking me to burn out. God wasn't asking me to work 70, 80 hours a week. What was actually motivating that type of crazy hours? You'd say, I thought it was love for people. I thought it was love. I thought I had a good motivation for all that. But in the process, when I burned out, I realized most of my work was looking for affirmation still, looking to solve my insecurities, inner insecurities. So if your leadership's, being energized by a need for love, in one sense, I was a beggar for love. If I'm needing that stuff, then my service has all kinds of crazy motivations that aren't healthy. And that's why if my motivations aren't right, then my leadership, I can still do some stuff and good stuff, but in the end, I'll probably be a driven man. I won't be a free man. I'll be a driven man or a woman. And I found many, since then, I realized that many leaders are driven. They're not actually free. They don't have they can't put up boundaries because they're not free. So I didn't put boundaries up because I needed my work. I needed my leadership for my own sake, not for the sake of others.
Wow, that's really powerful what you just shared, Phil. And I think that's like so many things that you talk about really resonate with me, because I feel like maybe I've gone a lot of the same path as you, or at least I'm seeing a lot of the same things. And yeah, and I burned out too this year, totally crashed and burned, and and was just in a real crisis. And I think a lot of that was just, and I was so driven. And I think a lot of it is just like, yeah, what was that need that I was trying to fill? And like, I need to be, like you said, I need to be free and freely receive. And so now, like, I used to go to God and be like, okay, God, yeah, I didn't read my Bible and I don't have all these things to give you. But I had to just go to God and be like, I'm completely empty. I feel like heck. I need you to fill me because I have nothing. Like, I've got nothing. And I think to be able to go to God with absolutely nothing and to freely receive, that took that crisis in my life. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten there.
And I agree.
Yeah.
And so these crises aren't, they're good for us. We have to actually go through them. And if we're willing to learn from them, there's so much good to come out of it. And it's, again, honestly, it's, I would say it's a God-given frustration. These type of things, I'm thankful that he actually allowed me to get to the end of myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and me too. Not in the moment, but now I do. I've heard it.
Yes.
I've heard it said this, Phil, and I wonder your perspective on this. I've heard people say, okay, leadership is always the problem. So I'm thinking you could talk about like with COVID now or whatever. Leadership is always the problem, and leadership is always the solution. Do you think there's anything good that in that phrase, or how would you what would you say about that?
Um, I mean, I think at some point, to be a good leader, you actually have to be a good follower at some point.
Mm,
I need to, because the best leaders are meek leaders. We know, I mean, Jesus himself said, I'm humble and meek. What does it mean to be meek and lowly, like Jesus said? Meekness isn't weakness. Meekness is power under control. And I know you have family members that are actually trained horses. A horse that's been actually broken is far more useful than a wild horse. And a broken horse doesn't mean it has less power. It actually has got the same power,
mm-hmm.
but now it can be controlled and be used for what it should be used for. And so a meek leader has to be someone under control, under command. And in many sense, of course, I have to submit myself to God.
Mm-hmm.
He is the leader. I am not the ultimate leader ever. So meekness is allowing yourself to be controlled actually by someone else, and especially in our case, by God. So yes, if you try to lead without meekness, you can do a lot of damage.
Mm.
But of course, the world needs leaders, and God asks us to. But I think in many ways, if everybody would realize, we all have places that we actually lead. Everybody, in one sense or another, has to lead. For instance, a mother has to lead in her home with her children. As she's raising those children, or if the man stays home, he has to raise those children. He's leading. So everyone is caught in a place where they lead something or someone. But we have to recognize the places that we are actually in those positions of leadership, and for the benefit of those who are under us, who we're actually blessing. Again, it's the motivation. Am I feeding myself through my leadership, or am I actually a free person to be able to bless those who I lead?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good point. Would you say that, talking about leading with meekness, could you use another word for meekness would be humility?
Yes, it's but humility, when I agree, I think it has humility involved. The reason why the word meekness, I think is important, it demands submission at some point. Mm-hmm. That's why I said a good leader is also a good follower at some point. Mm-hmm. And yes, it demands humility. I would think so.
Right. So, I'm kind of seeing now how I guess meekness isn't a word, like it's a word that I've heard. And I think it's a word that a lot of Bible people have heard, but a lot of people, okay, what is meekness? So you're just saying it's basically just being under control in some way.
Yes. Freedom, people think that submission to God doesn't bring freedom. It actually does. That's the paradox. Mm-hmm. Submission to God actually brings freedom.
Mm-hmm. Because you're no longer, like you said, you're no longer just driven. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Jesus was the meekest man on earth. And it's incredible what he was able to accomplish in his leadership. But he was always under the control of his Father. He constantly, all the time, was asking his Father what he should do. He wasn't out there doing his own thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we talked about... go ahead. Did you want to say more?
No, that's good.
Okay, so you talked again about receiving freely from God when you were describing kind of your how you see leadership. And then you also said some other things in there. Can you just pick that apart a little bit more? So we know now that we have to receive freely from God. We know now that we don't want to just be driven because we're trying to meet a need in the way that we're leading others, and we need them as much or more than they actually need us. What are some other parts to being a good leader?
So as I've even talked about, as we've been talking about even who I am and so forth, I think there's 3 I's, I would call them. Healthy identity, that we have to know who we are. If we're still confused, it's hard to be a good leader. The insecurities just drive us. So healthy identity is the first thing. The second thing is healthy intimacy. Intimacy. Now, when I talk about intimacy, I'm talking about the word intimacy demands letting yourself known and letting yourself be loved. It demands both things. You have to allow yourself to be known and allow yourself to be loved. That creates connection. Now, some people call it attachment theory. Whatever you want to call it, it's connection, it's relationship. And I'm not, intimacy is the ability to have healthy relationships. Now, where you're allowing others into your life and also allowing them to love you, because we'll never know if we're loved unless we're known. We only know that we're loved to the extent we're known.
Mm-hmm.
So a healthy leader needs to be someone who has healthy identity, healthy intimacy, but also healthy intentionality of what he's doing. And when I say intentionality, that's why in my phrase of what I'm about, what I'm trying to do in life, is that there has to be intentionality of reproducing other healthy leaders. And intention, for me, it's healthy discipleship and healthy leadership development. Now, so many people who are in spiritual leadership positions, they're doing stuff, they're teaching, they're preaching, they're doing all kinds of things, but they don't intentionally reproduce themselves. They don't intentionally disciple others, intentionally mentor others. I think a good leader will intentionally do these things.
Mm.
So intentional in their identity, healthy intimacy, and intentionality in what they're doing. I think you need all 3 in order to be, I would say, a healthy leader.
Yeah.
So the other thing is, like I said before, humility is allowing myself to be taken care of. A good leader is someone who not only serves others, but allows others to serve them. Often, when we allow someone else to serve us, they learn far more in that moment than us serving them.
So why?
So
go ahead.
So I have to become vulnerable. I actually have to put myself in a position where I'm actually needing and allowing others to serve me.
Why is that so hard, Phil? And maybe it's not hard for everybody, but it's certainly hard for me. And I'm guessing it was very hard for you because you seem quite passionate about that. So it's probably something you had to learn, I'm guessing.
Oh, as you know, I was as independent as they come. At 6 years old, I was already making my own decisions because I didn't have my parents around.
Mm.
So yes, I was so independent. I didn't need it. I acted as if I needed no one. Even when I got married, the hardest thing for my wife was I didn't allow her to play the role she was playing in my life. I came into marriage thinking she needed me, but I didn't come into marriage thinking I needed her.
Mm.
So that's horrible. In the end, of course, what role does she play? In the end, she feels less and less important. And so in many ways, I began to destroy the person I'm trying to live with even, because I wasn't allowing her to play her role.
Mm.
Because love, it has to be mutual. You have to allow the other person to have a role in your life. If I don't let you play a role in my life, sooner or later you're gonna feel devalued, and sooner or later you're gonna walk away from this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And good leadership is actually one which is vulnerable. And how do we get there? Well, in our brokenness. When we get to the end of ourselves, when we burn out, when we realize, oh, I can't actually control everything.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I can't do everything by myself. I actually need other people in my life. And that's been, honestly, one of the lessons that COVID has been teaching most pastors and most leaders.
Mm.
They now are beginning to realize the lack of relationship, the lack of that support in times of confusion, because most pastors are living in probably this is the most mysterious time of their life. Mm-hmm. They can't even measure what success is supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm.
So we're having to live in a very mysterious time, and if I don't have friendships, and this is the crazy thing, 95% of men would say they do not have a close friend.
No. Mm-hmm.
That's horrible, because we actually need it desperately, but we live as if we don't need it. And when there's no problems, we think we can do it. We can have it. But as soon as some problem comes along, we realize how desperate we are in our loneliness, in our isolation. And COVID has shown us the desperate need for actually close relationships that would actually support and encourage us in these types of times.
Yeah, and some people say that's the hardest thing about COVID. Like, they've gone through other hard things, but the worst part about COVID is that they have to go through hard things, but they don't have that support of other people. It's not tangible. They don't have somebody that can come over and bring them something, or come and give them a hug, or whatever, right? And so I think that COVID has really brought out, if there is anything maybe amiss in your life, it's really going to come to a head, and you're going to suddenly notice that, wow, I actually really do need these people.
Everybody who, instead of going to an office, have stayed home and worked from home, they didn't realize how much social connection they were getting by going to the office. Mm. And even in those 30-second moments where they would talk to someone, say hello to someone, those interactions, they actually didn't realize how important those interactions were.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know for me too, like, yeah, it's really affected me way more than I ever thought. And I think, like, it affects everybody differently based on what they're going through, what's happening, whatever. But yeah, what do leaders need to do right now, do you think? Leaders who are struggling.
I think in many cases, leaders haven't been given the chance to express their losses. We are very poor at mourning our losses. We almost haven't even been given the right to mourn. In most churches, people have never actually written a lament ever in their life. And 30% of the Psalms are laments. But we've never been taught or given the right to actually write a lament. We've almost thought you can't talk to God, or complaining and being that honest with God. Well, what I'm finding is I've been actually helping pastors mourn their losses and actually write laments for the first time in their life. And what it does is it's allowing them the right to express what's really going on, and not try to cover up and try to just push through. So many people are just thinking, I'm going to get through this. I'm going to get to the end of COVID, instead of learning what they should be learning now within COVID. It's not about just putting up with it and trying to get to the end. I think God's wanting us to learn things in the midst of it. And so one of the things I'm finding is helping people to express their true losses, their frustrations, and someone to listen and value those frustrations. Because often leaders don't have someone else to listen to that, the negative script.
Mhm. I think, yeah, there's so much about, oh, you got to be positive, you got to be positive, and if you're negative, then you're just going to bring everybody down, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think mourning, and if you look at the laments in the Bible, it's a lament always has three moments. It's a complaining, then it's petition, asking God for things. But in the end, you start to actually worship and praise Him. And you recognize that you've lost your perspective. But as you're writing out these true emotions, uh, actually, you do gain perspective. And you begin to look and see, okay, what's God? Who is God in the midst of all this frustration? And you allow Him to play a role. But if you never given the chance to express this stuff, you also miss out how God wants to apply Himself to this stuff, but to these difficult moments.
Yeah, it's so interesting. As you're talking, Phil, I'm just like, oh my goodness. Like, I wanted to talk to you back in like January when I was trying to connect with you and it wasn't working out. You were busy and then we couldn't, and then it's like God's timing was perfect because everything you're saying right now, hopefully to the listeners too, but to me, is just really impacting me. And I've gone through this and I've done that where I write out in my diary, write out in my journal. I'm just like, this is brutal. Life sucks. Here's exactly how I feel. I'm mad at you, God, because this happened. I'm, blah, 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 blah. And I just go on. And it's so right that like, and then you start asking, you're like, okay, I've got it out. And then it's like, okay, now I want to ask you, God, help me to change this attitude. Help me to see the joy in this. Help me to, give me comfort, whatever it is. And then by the end, it seems like I'm praising him. Like I started here and I was in the tank and now look where I am, right? And it's amazing, just that process. It's just amazing.
That's right. I totally agree. And I think we forget that we're not supposed to bring to God what ought to be there. He wants us to bring what actually is there.
Yeah.
And we somehow think, no, I should only bring this to Him. Well, that's crazy. He already knows.
Yeah.
And one of the things COVID has shown that I think is probably one of the most important pieces we've learned through COVID is that most of us were depending on our Sunday worship, our Sunday gatherings for some input every week. Now, COVID hasn't affected God at all.
Mm.
It didn't affect God. It didn't affect our connection with God at all. But for some reason, we haven't learned how to actually have a more intimate relationship with Him. He's been with us all the way through COVID, but have we actually gotten closer to Him? Have we allowed Him to play the role He actually wants to play? And I think what it's teaching us that our Christianity is way too based on what happens Sunday. And we haven't learned how to live and enjoy His presence Monday through Sunday. And so I think COVID's forced us to actually look at the weakness we have of connection with God Himself, because that hasn't gone away. But most of us probably didn't have a strong connection with Him. It says, North America, it says that most people pray 2 minutes a day that are Christians. Well, what's 2 minutes out of a whole day? We're not accustomed to actually letting Him walk with us throughout the day. Now, if we did, COVID, we would have lived this stuff, I think, differently. And He's teaching it. And He knows how long we need this in order to actually learn some of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. Yeah. So many things you're saying. It's just like, oh, like, and I'm learning this, Phil. So like, as you're talking to me, I'm not like, whoa, this is really abstract. I get it because I've gone through this and I know it's probably going to be something that I'll have to go through for a long time yet. But just learning that. And I've gone through different seasons in my life, right? Where it's like, I feel like I can talk to God. I want to talk to God. I have that hunger and that thirst for Him. And then there's other times where it's just been kind of dry, and I feel like when you hit a wall, when things get really hard, then you're so dependent on God to get out of it. And then I was able to just be super vulnerable like I've never been. And to have, like you said, that intimate relationship with God where He knows me so well. And that's something that I realized that I really wanted. I wanted to be known. I wanted to be seen for who I was instead of trying to put on this face of what I I thought that I should be, and so to just be super honest with God, this is how I feel. And it's amazing. And I think you're so right. We always think we need to bring something to God. And I just had a conversation actually with one of my nutrition clients the other day. We were talking about food and macros and calories and she was sharing stuff and I'm like, you don't need macros and calories. You need a relationship with God right now. And we were talking about that. And just again, I said, go talk to God. I want you to just tell him everything. If you need to shake your fist, if you need to scream at him, like whatever you need to do, like let it out. And she was just like, she's like, oh my goodness, like I've got goosebumps. She's like, I just never thought that I could really do that. And to just be able to have that, I think that's where the relationship with God is, to just be totally honest and totally vulnerable, like maybe you never have with him or anybody else before.
I agree. God, as someone, I think it's Brennan Manning said, God refuses to love the imposter.
Mm.
He loves the real you. That's who he loves, not the imposter. But we keep on trying to show him a facade of who we are. That's why intimacy demands letting yourself known, so that then you believe that he loves the true one that you have allowed to be known.
Yeah. And
So
I still wonder, like, why is that so difficult for us? Is it just a cultural thing? Like, was that any easier in other cultures that you've seen, Phil, or is it kind of the same, just human experience?
it's our brokenness.
Mm,
We've all been broken. We've all felt shame.
mm,
Shame actually controls us far more than we actually want to admit. We are not sure that people love us. Of course, we've all been rejected. We've all been hurt at some point, and it demands looking at how much have I covered up for all those those wounds, or have I actually allowed those wounds to be looked at, healed? We're all wounded. We're all wounded. There's no one that isn't wounded, and therefore depends on. That's why do I receive from God. You see, I have all kinds of barriers put up to receive. I show a facade to you to show you that I actually don't need you. I often, I walk around and what I'm portraying to people is, I don't need you guys. I'm okay. I'm totally fine without anyone else.
mm-hmm.
But inside, I'm screaming, I wish somebody would actually jump over the wall and get in here and be and actually be with me,
Mm-hmm.
right? But of course, it's fearful because there's always the chance that you will be rejected again.
Mm-hmm.
There's always, I have to take the risk. Vulnerability is a risk that everyone takes. Now, with God, I don't think the risk, actually, thank goodness, he's not going to come around. Yes, he may show me what's really there, and it may be very painful what he shows me. But whatever he does for me, it's for my good. And I have to get to the point of being able to trust God. But I put it on God. I actually just transfer my concept of how I see people, and I put it on God. My concept of my earthly father, I just transfer that to God. And if my father wasn't interested, didn't show interest in me, then I think God won't show interest in me. I naturally do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do too. I think whatever our experiences are, we put that on God. And I think that's why it's so important to actually be in the Word and not just go to church now and then, not just maybe listen to the odd podcast, but to actually be in the Word and say, okay, who is God? Because we need to understand exactly who he is. Because if we don't understand exactly who he is, we're just going to assume that he's like our dad, like our uncle, like our friends, whatever. And none of them are perfect. So we're, no wonder we don't trust God, because we don't understand who he is. We don't think he can be trusted, right?
Yes, it's whose voice am I listening to?
Mm-hmm.
That's true, and like that's why my phrase of what leadership is, I finished my phrase with that they freely receive from their heavenly Father. We all need a Father that is trustworthy.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, and we don't know that he's trustworthy until we start trusting him sometimes, right? Because we have to just sort of be that vulnerable and say, okay, like, you say you're trustworthy, let's go. right?
Yeah, we have to let go of what we are trusting.
Yeah.
And most of that, for me anyway, it was mostly I'm still trusting myself.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I'm thinking of listeners right now, Phil. So, people listening to this that are thinking, okay, a lot of the things that Phil say that make sense to me. I need to be more vulnerable. I do have some pain from my past. I have a hard time going to God with just in all my mess. But I don't really know, like, how do I do this, Phil? Like, should they go to a therapist? Should they go to a counselor? Like, is there something that they could do that would help them?
Of course, counselors. I mean, I've gone to counselors and they've helped me. And and honestly, we should get over the thought that uh, it's just certain people that need counselors. We all need counselors.
Yeah.
Every person needs counselors in their life. And the quicker you actually receive counsel from others, the better it'll be. But if you can't go to a counselor, there are things. There's some fabulous books that can help you start on this journey. Um, I'm a firm believer of what Pete Scazzero talks about, and that he says you can't be spiritually mature while at the same time being emotionally immature, because we're holistic. God saves us, the whole person. He wants to transform the whole person, and so any of the books by Pete Scazzero on emotionally healthy spirituality, his courses would help you start to actually look at some of these things. Another very good study, which I think you would have to do it with others, look for a church that's offering freedom sessions. Freedom Sessions is another by Ken Dick, and it helps you actually start to look at some of these things, make you realize, oh, okay, I recognize what's actually motivating my life. But so Freedom Sessions, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality.
Yeah, who wrote Emotional Healthy Spirituality again?
Pete Scazzero.
Okay, Pete Scazzero. Okay, thank you.
And he has lots of books.
Okay.
And he's coming out with a brand new one this month, even on emotionally healthy discipleship. These guys look at Christianity from a holistic point of view. It's not just about cognitive learning. We seem to think that we can change everything just by reading and learning more knowledge. No, I actually have to deal with the emotional baggage I have. My emotional state is affecting my spiritual state. And so I think we need to allow these guys there's a lot of books about this, but those are two. I mean, Attachment Theory by Sue Johnson is a Canadian psychologist. She's amazing. She's great. She's got a book called The Dance of Anger, which is helpful for couples who are having struggle. Her latest book on attachment theory is fabulous because, again, it's an issue. Our problems aren't behavior. I don't believe we're not trying to change people's behavior as much as changing their capacity to relate with God and others more healthily. When we relate to God healthily, our behaviors will actually catch up as well.
So when you're working with pastors, when you're working with leaders, do you feel like that's one of the biggest things is they need to be more vulnerable with God and maybe with each other?
Totally.
Okay.
Totally. I do not think, for instance, this is one of the things that Brene Brown talks about and other people talk about. And I believe in Freedom Session, as well as Pete Scazzero, they all will show you that shame cannot be dealt with in a vacuum. Shame has to be dealt with in a public forum where relationship can be offered. Because shame is a relational wound. Therefore, to heal a relational wound, you have to have a relational uh, solution. So shame is a relational issue that needs to be dealt with relationally. You can't deal with it in a closet, alone, isolated, just knowing something. No, you actually have to bring the true self forward and actually allow it to be loved by someone. So that's why most people think we can learn this stuff in isolation. We can't. There's no such. If we could learn all this in isolation, we don't need the church. We don't need each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose with COVID too, like because the churches haven't been able to meet in the same way, to the same capacity, you can't hug each other, you can't do all of that. Is like how can we do it then right now, Phil? For those who are just like, I want to get onto this.
Honestly, even face to face on a platform like this is healthy. It's possible. You can talk to people still, even on your phone, but don't look at each other at least in picture. I think the closer you can get to being in live, the better, of course. But people need to just be listened to. We need each other to value what we're thinking even. So just listening to one another is huge. It's very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And caring for one another, we still can care for one another. We can still pray for one another. There's all kinds of things we still can do. We can go for a walk with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I go for walks with guys.
Mm-hmm.
And in those walks, we're very honest. It's as if we were together in a church place, walking, but we're outside. So it takes a bit more of intentionality, a bit more work, but honestly, get out and do some walking with a friend, or ask someone to come for a walk with you, and start to just be honest with that person. It will benefit you. It'll benefit us.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Like
you can't just wait for COVID to be over. Too many people are just waiting for it to end. You can't wait for it to end. And that, like, right from the start of COVID, I said, I am not going to wait. And that's actually why I started the podcast. I'm like, I have a little bit more time now. I'm not teaching as many classes. What can I do? You know, the business was online. We did that. You can't wait. You just got to do it. And you know what? I had never seen a counselor or a therapist before. And now I've seen, I don't know how many different counselors and therapists. And we would do it like Zoom, like this. We would talk. And man, was that helpful. I did see, I think, one in person, and that was it. Everything else, and I mean, maybe it was more helpful in person. I don't know, but I've gotten a lot of help for a lot of my mess just by doing these kind of things. And yeah, maybe it's not ideal, but it's something. You got to just start. And then you can always read books, right? Some of those books that you suggested.
But even read a book, do a book study with somebody, read a chapter, talk about it. I find that's a huge, just one chapter a week with someone or a couple people. Now, I encourage you, honestly, most of the transformations that occur in our lives won't be in big groups. It'll be in small groups. And COVID isn't stopping us from even 3 of us going for a walk. And so I think if you're willing to be honest with 1 or 2 people, that's where most of the changes can actually happen. Because that's where you can be more vulnerable. But even reading a book and sharing your thoughts each week is a great way to start, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you, Phil. What would you say is kind of, I mean, we talked a lot about leadership. You deal with a lot of leaders. And I mean, I'd like to just keep talking about this, honestly. But what would be your message kind of to the world? Like, what do people need to know?
Christianity isn't about behavior modification. That's when I grew up, I thought Christianity was about behavior modification. And I became a good Pharisee. That's what it produced.
Right.
I was this good little kid. And I actually grew up doing most things right. I mean, behavior-wise. But boy, was I ever a lost soul with no connection. And honestly, Christianity is about connection. I mean, Jesus only left us 2 commands: love him with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love one another as we love ourselves. So it's about relationship. It's about intimacy with him and intimacy with others. That's what I'm after. I'm far more concerned about, in the end, I think I'm going to be evaluated. Success for me is the quality of love that I have for God, and the quality of love I have for others, and even the quality of love I have for myself.
Mm.
I think that is probably the bottom line of how I want to be evaluated. How well did I love? Not how well did I do everything, not how well did I behave. No. And if there is connection, emotional, relational connection, I guarantee there'll be the other. And of course, it starts with allowing God to love me, because I can't love him without him first loving me. So that's why one of our biggest problems is learning to let him love us. Once we let him truly love who we really are, but there's a lot of freedom that comes from that.
Yeah, and you talked about loving yourself, and I always thought that was a very selfish thing. And, Christian people shouldn't be talking about loving yourself. But I got it. And I mean, I sort of understood the premise a little bit. But I got it when I suddenly was able to really realize, not in my head, but in my heart, how much God actually loved me. And I'm thinking, well, if God loves me that much, then suddenly I had sort of the freedom to accept and love myself. And suddenly I was like, I really like that God made me this way. I really like that I'm that way. And maybe I don't like this part of me, but there's so many things that I was able to just be more free in, and also free to love others. Again, not from that needy, like, I need you, and if I give you, some love and attention, then you'll affirm that I'm doing the right thing, and then that will feed my big gaping hole that I can't seem to fill. Instead of that, it's just like you're filling and you're free, right? And I think that's where just that love comes. It comes from that overwhelming sense that God loves us, and then it just sort of spills out. We're not like looking for, where are we going to find this love? Like, it's just showering down on us.
That's right. I agree. So that's why, for me, it's been a long process of changing my identity from being a servant of God to truly being his son, and allowing him to take care of me. I'm far weaker than I want to admit. I'm far weaker than he sees me as a sheep. He sees me as a kid. He says, I have to be a child if I'm going to learn this stuff. Well, it's a process of returning to actually not be afraid of being a kid, a child in the care of someone else. But that's what gives us strength for what we're doing, and gives us security, gives us, that's what allows us to serve in a healthy way, I think. So that's what I'm after. I'm all constantly helping pastors have to deal with the barriers they have put up to receive.
Yeah, wow. Wow, and I just think of what you said, you have to be a little child. Like, you have to be like a child to be able to learn from God, to be able to let him love you. And yet, as you age, like, it's funny, Phil, because, you're older than me by a little bit. And so as your age, as you get older, a little, maybe just by a touch, as you get older, you're probably actually, in a way, becoming more of a child, in that you're letting God love you. So in a sense, it's like a paradox, kind of.
James Houston, he's in his 90s, and he's getting to the end of his life, and he has written so many books. And now at the end of his life, his last book that he's writing, and I think it may have actually come out, I'm not sure, it's on the theology of childhood. That all these years, how God has been trying to teach him what it means to be a child.
Yeah.
And he is an amazing, a very, very spiritual, incredible leader, taught. He's written so many books. And here he is at the end of his life saying, it's about learning to be a child.
Yeah, and that's really beautiful because we think we're getting so old and we think that our life is almost over or whatever, and yet it's like no, you're finally learning this stuff. And then when you come to heaven and you get to be with me, you're going to understand so much more, right? And so I think like yeah, we just need to keep learning and growing, and that's why I don't want to waste any time. I don't want to be like, well, COVID's here, so I'm just going to kind of hunker down and just kind of wait it out. It's like no, there's so much to be learned right now, especially right now because there's so many things being challenged, right? With just all the restrictions and all that. There's so many things being challenged. And I'm just like, okay, God, what do you want to teach me? Like, I'm here. Like, let's learn this, like almost like in a, like, just a hungry way. I'm so hungry to continue to learn and the things that God's teaching me. It's just really exciting. Like, it just, yeah, totally lights me up.
I would like to just encourage anybody who's listening and wants to actually learn a bit more about all this. I encourage them to read the book With. There's a book called With, and it's by Skye Jethani. And it's all about the ways we actually treat God when actually what he wants us to learn is to be with him. And he has some incredible insights of how most of us try to relate with God, and it's not about just being with him. And so when he says, come and be one of my disciples and follow me, he's saying, come and be with me. Mm-hmm. And so I encourage you to read that. It's about, and COVID is really teaching us why the Christian church needs people, all of us, to get back to this basic premise. Christianity is mostly about just being with Jesus.
Mm. Yeah, and it is very freeing. People think, oh, I don't want to do religion. It's all a bunch of rules. It's not a bunch of rules. It's not supposed to be a bunch of rules. Those are man-made rules that have been put on people.
Yeah, it's about honestly enriching the relationship, all your relationships actually. That's what Christianity is about, enriching your relationships. Mm-hmm. And if you start out with the right one, it will enrich all the others.
Mm. Yeah. Well, Phil, thank you so much. If people want to know more about you, they want to connect with you, maybe they want to, like, maybe they're a pastor or they know pastors that want to do some leadership training. Where was the best place for them to go for that kind of thing, Phil? Do you have a website or is
this is a dangerous thing to do?
or do you want to just send them my way and I can connect them with you, or what's the best?
That would be great. Probably the best. You can be my filter, and you can be my boundaries.
Okay, yeah. I'll be like, no, Phil's too busy for you. No.
No. But if they want to send me an email, I'm happy to write emails to people who truly want to, more about leadership and so forth. I'm happy to give them my email.
Okay. Yeah, and I can maybe put it in the notes too, so that people can access it. And I'd actually like to talk to you too about like more if there's leadership courses or something that maybe I could be involved in, because I feel like that's something that I'm missing, I guess. Like I have a lot of pieces coming to place, but I'm sort of missing that connection with other leaders. And I'm really hungry for it, Phil. I'm really hungry. And that's why I was so excited to talk to you. And I'm trying to connect with other people. And, people are trying to connect on Facebook. And I love it, right? I love it. But I just feel like sometimes it could be a place where I think a lot of leaders do. They have a lot of walls up and they're not letting people in. And I think leaders are getting better at that. Some of them are, but it is difficult. It's definitely something I've struggled with, so I get it. But I want another leader that I can connect with that's just like raw and real, And so I'm reaching out to some of these different ladies, trying to find somebody like that. And it's not as easy as it sounds like it should be.
No, you have to be close enough. That's the other thing, you have to be close enough in order to pick up stuff. Just knowledge doesn't do it often. You have to walk with people and see how they actually apply this stuff. Mm-hmm. Often it's in the mentoring. It's when you're with these type of leaders that you learn the most. It's not at a course often. It's mm-hmm. actually often walking with someone. Mm-hmm. That you pick up, oh, this is what it looks like.
Yeah, Yeah, and I mean,
And so,
I'm very passionate about that, and I think for me, it's just a matter of like just reaching out to somebody and saying, "Hey, can I spend some time with you? Can we chat maybe once in a while? Can we, and I can do that. I just have to do that, and then I have to be willing to be vulnerable and actually open up too, because that's not always easy. So
that's right.
yeah,
So yeah, so send them my email, and they need to at least tell me in the email where they heard me, where they heard this. I mean,
okay, that'll be helpful. Yeah, okay.
that would be great because I get emails from all over the place, and
It may get
so
lost otherwise. Maybe put it in the
that's right.
subject. I heard you talking on the Carla Rand show or something like
That's right.
that.
Then I will get it.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Well, thanks
Okay.
again so much, Phil. Just such a great conversation. I just really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about leadership and about being vulnerable and all those good things.
No, thank you. I hope it serves someone.
Yeah.
That's great. No,
Thanks.
it's been good. Thank you, Carla.
Yeah, well, thank you, Phil. This episode is brought to you by my company, Power Fitness Online. We are a tight-knit fitness community, and we guide you every step of the way to get fit and stay fit through our live workouts, nutrition coaching, and incredible support team. Go to powerfitnessedson.com to learn more. Thank you for tuning into the podcast today. If you enjoyed it, please leave a positive review on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Music, or wherever you're listening. And if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, I would love to see your comments. I would love to know what you think about this episode and interact with you. I love hearing from you. Once again, I'm Carla Rand, and this is The Carla Rand Show, and I can't wait to see you next week for our next episode.